All right, Merry Christmas and welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and if you hear anybody wrapping gifts in the background, that's not an elf. That's actually my daughter. She's actually in here with her old man today, and she's wrapping up some gifts. But I've told her to be real quiet so we can get to this awesome Bigfoot encounter story from the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And if you have not, you can go over to PacWestBigfoot.com, PacWestBigfoot.com. You can get over there and sign up for the clan. Up at the top there, you'll see a little color changing bar, and I like to give away a little something free every single month to one of you lucky winners. So get on over there, and I want to also say this real quick. Merry Christmas. God bless you guys, and thank you for being here. Especially for all of you who have really come out of the woodworks and have sat with me through this year in some interviews and whatnot. That has just been a spectacular time getting to know you, your experiences and encounters with with Bigfoot. And I just want to say I greatly appreciate you guys out here. So there you go. All right. I have kind of a little bit of a sore throat left over from when kids giving it to me, and yes, I get sick all the time. Everybody's like, boy, you get sick a lot, Dave, and I say, yes, I have a lot of kids. So there you go. So I get sick a lot. All right, so let's get into this week's Bigfoot encounter story. Family has Bigfoot encounter while traveling to Bend, Oregon. Off to grandmother's house we went, but when we broke down while traveling with the family to Bend, Oregon during the late fall, well, we never expected a Bigfoot encounter, that is for sure. I recently read your encounter story that was also featured, also featured other places online about the individuals caught out at night between Medford and Klamath Falls on Crater Lake Highway, surrounded by Bigfoot. It creeped me out and, well, was extremely familiar to me, as that is what happened to us. Here's what happened to us on the way to my mom's place out in Bend during the late fall of 1993. Off to grandmother's house we go. Back then, I was not earning the living I do today or have since the mid-2000s. During my college years at SOU, I was married, and we had 2 children. Both were girls, ages 8 and the other 10 at the time. I was about to finish up college and move from working in the on and off landscape of lumber mills and get a job as a business consultant, which I did eventually. We had an older vehicle, a 1986 Jeep Grand Cherokee that kept overheating sometimes, get some unexpected flat tires, or simply not start on other days. We were living at the time in a small town outside of Ashland, Oregon, called Talent. I could, on the days that stupid thing would not turn over, take a bus, and it was free for students back then, and I still believe it is. It was a couple days before Thanksgiving that year, early winter, or late fall if you will, here in Oregon. Out where I was from in Bend, it was already showing signs of winter at that time. As a matter of fact, my mother warned me that it was pretty nasty out that way already, and if we could not make it, that was okay. Well, I had thrown on some new tires, had chains, and had driven in far worse, I could almost guarantee. So, we would head out there regardless to enjoy a great time with my folks and my wife's father. Her mother passed away 5 years before this incident from cancer, so she really wanted to visit her dad. It was always a great time heading back home with our kids. The wife and I would take them to the little places me and their mom hung out in as high school sweethearts, and, of course, they would make funny faces and laugh at us. But, in the end, it was time for making some great memories. I just never thought in a million years one of those lasting memories would be of several Bigfoot surrounding us in the middle of the woods, over the mountain and through the woods. The Jeep was kind of a nightmare for us. Some said it was a great vehicle, others says it was the worst Jeep ever made. I like Jeep, and since then have bought 2 others, and today own a Jeep that seems to continue to be, and has been, very reliable. However, that year's model was nightmarish for us, and put us in the middle of a nightmare too. The classic stand by me attitude. Yeah, we thought ourselves that fearless, even courageous. We decided to take off on a Sunday after church. I had all my studies done, and the kids were going to take a couple extra days off. Besides, my wife homeschooled them. They could still do a little work while spending the week at Grandma and Grandpa's house for the holiday. It would take us a couple 2-3 hours to get there, and almost 4 hours would seem a little ridiculous, but that was how long it took us after breaking down and being surrounded by some creatures I thought might harm us at first. This time we decided to take a different route, one that would not take us to Klamath Falls and cut up 97. Instead, we decided to take Highway 242 out of Eugene that would put us in Sisters just north of Bend. We also wanted to stop and check out South Sisters from a small little turnoff that had a great view, I remembered, a place called Lava Camp. Everything was just fine. We were cruising along until we decided to stop for a pee break in view. Daddy, what's that? We pulled over and down a decently maintained road that had a great view of Sisters Mountains, and it was the same place I'd asked my wife to marry me just over a decade earlier. We went on a hike that day through Lava Camp area. Even back then, I had never had any incidents like this, ever, and I spent a lot of time out in the woods of Oregon growing up. Personally, I think they are around all the time. Bigfoot, that is. I think they prefer to leave us alone, or else I would have had more encounters like this, and there would be no doubt of the reality of their existence today. They are real. I know some stories I hear pretty far-fetched, but in the back of my mind, well, I guess mine seems that way too to some, but it happened nonetheless. We pulled off and drove down the old but familiar dirt road to the lake named Lava Camp Lake. There was a little parking area in back of the restrooms. This is where we parked. Yes, there was a good view of the mountains, some restrooms, and we figured we'd walk over to the lake before we left. We did walk over to the lake after taking a pee break. It was overcast that day, and here and there some flakes of snow were falling, but the forecast was calm for most of the week, and only a few inches or so of snow was expected. It ended up being more like 7 inches Thanksgiving Day, but that is the Weather Channel for you. We stood there for a few, taking in the lake, and the edges were already iced up. That time of year, I was used to that thing having a complete sheet over it anyways. My wife, moments later, noticed a couple people across the lake. One person seemed really tall, the other about the size of our oldest daughter, and as I said, she was 10 at the time, and we are not tall people, I assure you. It was funny how they seemed to be dressed, she thought, all in dark colors or black, but we thought nothing of it, as there is a parking lot over that way as well. We finished taking in the sights and heading back to the Jeep about 15 minutes later. It would not start. I would try, so I knew it was either flooded or it was just not getting the spark it needed to turn over completely again. Back then, it was easy to work on a car. Today, well, you need a computer programming geek to lift the hood. But I got out, lifted the hood, and got to work. I was pretty handy with the old working on the car thing by that point. I took out a couple spark plugs, cleaned them off a bit, and reinserted them. That did not work. That is when I started smelling gas. The thing was flooding. Well, that was going to take a little longer to fix, as I would have to wait it out after I checked the filter. I was lifting the hood again when I heard my daughter asking my wife to look over to the southeast of the restrooms. It's something that caught her eye. My wife was so intrigued, apparently, that she got out of the Jeep and took a few steps in the direction she was looking. I turned and looked, but saw nothing until she pointed it out. Bigfoot. What to do when you're surrounded. It was around 11 a.m., give or take 10 minutes or so, I remember. There was nobody around. Well, no other cars at that moment except that what we thought were people across the small lake earlier. Apparently, they were not people. They were a couple Bigfoot. She walked slowly over to me and pointed. Finally, I saw it as it moved through the trees. It had a weird walk or gait to it. That much is true from what I've heard from others. The face was hard to make out, but I could say that eventually, when we saw one up close, it was very ape-like. The only human aspect of these things were arms and legs. This thing seemed rather tall and skinny, actually, skinnier than the others we would soon see. It had to be 7 to 8 foot tall, dark brown hair that actually flowed in the breeze that was picking up rather quickly. However, it did seem to have some white or gray tint to its hair here and there. Later I came to believe it was an older one. Maybe it was sick and old, and that was the reason for it being skinnier than the others, but who knows? I'm not a biologist. It kept up its weird walk, always looking between where it was headed and back at us, actually. Eventually it stopped. That is when it tilted its upper body back and made a sort of whistle twice. Immediately came a response from the other side of us. There was another one, this one closer to where we were parked. Talked about being freaked out. This one was bigger, taller, and the face was just like a massive gorilla. The brown line was deep and dark. The eyes could barely be seen, and the mouth was basically a slit, but long and wide. The head sat directly on its shoulders, it seemed, and its scowl scared the crud out of me all of a sudden. Then, from directly behind us came 3 whoop-like sounds. Whoop, whoop, whoop. That was followed by each one of them doing the same, basically repeating the one we could not see behind us. We were surrounded, and that is when all that flashed through my mind was the kids and the wife. I hit that point that went past fear and directly into the survival of my kids and my wife. I told them to get back in the car, but slowly. I had not yet, at that point, got the car started. Actually, when I saw these things, I had one plug left. I had pulled out again and cleaned them off in a hurry. After a few more minutes, I guess 3 to 4, I reinstalled the plug, put everything back together, and always while looking over my shoulder or on the other side of the car every few seconds or so. My wife kept pretending like there was nothing there, just for show, of course, in hopes to not set one of these things off. I guess she was playing normal, to make it not seem we were as fearful as we actually were. Maybe they sensed fear, and that is what she was trying to avoid. They did not seem to come in any closer than they already were, but their aggressive sounding behavior did grow as I lowered the hood and shut it. Sticks and rock throwing. If my vehicle was not already all scratched up with a dent in it, these things, well, the one to the right of me threw a stick, well, more like a limb at my driver's side window and hit it. Then, as well as hearing my daughter squeak rather loudly when it hit, a decent-sized rock came flying out of the tree line and hit the side door. Later, we would see the scratch it left. I sat for a second longer waiting for the flooding of the car to subside, all the while literally saying a prayer under my breath that this thing would start. I watched as the one in the back of us, in the rearview mirror, moved to the right out of sight. I was hoping it simply left and was done, and that the others would follow. But I was wrong. I looked over to my right, and faster than snot this thing had joined the other one on the driver's side of the vehicle, not 30 yards away at most. It looked really mad or upset. Its droopy face seemed like it was getting ready to let loose on us, and what did come scared us to our core and had my wife and daughter screaming at the top of their lungs. This thing suddenly let out a scream that even today I cannot fully describe. Our car, it literally vibrated, and the sound felt as though it was in the car with us, and trust me, our windows were all the way up. For a second there, my wife said she thought the windows were going to literally explode. She would mention later. She screamed. My youngest daughter screamed, and I and the oldest held our hands over our ears for a second, but it did not help at all. As soon as it stopped, another stick or limb came flying at the car, this time from the passenger side. I stuck the key in the ignition and it did not start. I did it again, nothing. Bang! A rock hit the side of the car again. I was starting to yell a bit myself, and even let out a word I normally wouldn't as I turned the car over again. It started. I could not believe it, but the car finally started. Cannot tell you how I felt when that stupid car turned over. I screamed myself, but with joy and relief at the time. It stepped out. I backed up and took off as fast as we could go. Unfortunately, it was not as fast as we would like. As I started down the only road in back to the main highway, that was when the biggest monster I'd ever seen stepped out onto the side of the road as I passed. As I passed it, I swear it yelled or screamed and ran back to the tree line that skirted the road. This thing towered above my Jeep, and Jeeps are pretty tall. This thing, I swear, was at least 8 foot tall, hands down, or more. My wife and girls were starting to calm down as we hit the highway and headed for Grandma and Grandpa's house, this time without a single stop. I hated that car. Matter of fact, my parents got me an early present that year, the down payment for another one. My daughters were still rather frightened for days after that, but only when they started thinking about the event. My youngest, however, did have some nightmares for a while on and off. I am not sure these things are as dangerous as some say, but they are wild animals for sure. It was as if we interrupted them or we were simply in the wrong place, the wrong time, I supposed. They are real. Bigfoot does exist, and that is not the first time they apparently hang out up and around that little lake. So if you and yours head up that way, be safe, be armed, but always be aware that they are there too. Merry Christmas.